You are listening to Abnormal Spaces.
I'm Donnie.
I'm Ryan.
In this podcast, we discuss conceptual realities, the researchers, authors, and explorers who describe and define them, as well as our personal experiences in these abnormal spaces. In this episode, we discuss the life and work of Wilhelm Reich, his discovery of orgone, his ideas on how to utilize it, and the many inventors who have created devices to generate and concentrate this force of life. Maybe a year ago or a couple of months ago, we had talked about different things and you had told me about Wilhelm Reich, and I didn't know what to expect. A lot of times when you tell me things, I don't know what to expect, and then I go down various rabbit holes and am usually fascinated. This one blows my mind. First and foremost, this guy, I really think he was onto something, and I've never known of a case of censorship like this. And before we even get into like the life and times and his work and everything else, he wrote a book in the late 40s and published it that was so sensitive that the Russian government, the German government, and the United States government all banned it. And the United States burned all the copies, and we'll get into that later. And it wasn't even about his energy. It was about the mass psychology of fascism.
Yep.
And essentially, he said, he wasn't defending Hitler or anything like that, but what he was saying is, the people allowed that to happen because they were so repressed and felt somewhat hopeless that they elevated this person to power and to more power, than he should have gotten. And yeah, I mean, sure, evil person, etc. But by the same token, Reich was making the argument that it was because of the repression that happened. And the governments were like, hey, look, that's our bad guy. We can blame everything on Hitler now that he's dead and the war's over. And we don't want them knowing that we manipulate them in that way.
Yeah.
And so they just were like, this doesn't exist. And that's why most people probably haven't ever heard of him, is because for the 40s and 50s and 60s, 40s and 50s, many governments went out of their way to eliminate all record of him and his work and everything.
Yeah, he was basically saying that the Nazis and the governments just know how to exploit the natural tendencies for humans to have a leader and to be like, oh, we need a leader.
Yeah.
We need security, and not that they created it.
Right.
They just knew how to manipulate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And that's like one thing.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing is, that's not really what he devoted his life's work to.
No.
That was just an observation that he made.
Yeah.
So real quick, kind of a little backstory on Wilhelm Reich. He came from a wealthy family. They had a very large farm in what is now Ukraine, but back then it was Austria, I guess. The borders of Europe have changed a lot and probably will continue. But anyway, his family had a large farm. He was tutored by lots of great tutors. His mother had an affair with one of the tutors. And when it was discovered, she committed suicide.
Oh, yeah.
She commits suicide, and this was when he was 13, and his father died 4 years later of tuberculosis. So now here he is, 17, and, he's been through this betrayal and devastation and all this stuff. That's when he wrote to Sigmund Freud. So Freud was just gaining some prominence in this time. Wilhelm Reich was born, I think, 1897. It's right at the end of the 1800s. So Sigmund Freud was just starting to gain some popularity, etc. And so he was accepted to come study under Freud. And I think that experience with his mother's affair, at this time of coming into adulthood and then meeting Sigmund Freud, I think that really fed into some of his early work regarding sexuality and orgasms and the energy of orgasms, etc. I don't know that that would have happened had his mom not been who she was and had he not met Sigmund Freud shortly thereafter and studied under him.
Yeah.
I think that informed a lot of his approach.
Freud started sending him patients
Yeah.
for his studies or whatever. I think it was just at the very, very beginning of when he could have client or patients. And yeah, I didn't even know any of that stuff, man. I watched a documentary and I had to do a lot of looking and reading.
Yeah.
Because, I always think about Reich as the orgone guy or the cloudbuster guy, but just because those are the two things that were the culmination of all these experiments and all these tests that kind of led up to that, Yeah, all the other stuff, like when it started with the orgasm, and Freud had his ideas about the libido, and then Reich's like, well, what is that? He had his explanations, of course, and Reich wasn't satisfied about that.
Yeah, well, and that actually was the beginning of them kind of splitting.
Yeah.
Because, he was convinced, so Freud was convinced that there wasn't a way to quantify it or to measure it or anything like that.
Yeah.
And Reich was like, no, this exists and we're going to figure out how to measure it, how to observe it, how to harness it, etc.
Yeah.
And so that's when they diverged. One interesting thing is psychoanalysts, as they were referred to in the time, this is the mid-20s, they always sat behind their patient. The patient laid on a couch, and they sat behind the patient. So Reich was the first psychoanalyst to sit across from the patient. And then he was like, there is this armor that people have, and they don't want to really confront their problems, and they don't want to release those problems. So he started advising patients to get undressed to whatever was comfortable to them, males and females. And then with some of them that weren't really making much progress, he would actually massage them and try to work that out. When I first read this, I'm like, oh, well, he studied under Freud and he's got the, he's, but then he didn't do that particularly long. What I ended up learning about him was he was a constant experimenter. And so he would try things. And that was the thing that he tried. He's like, well, I've got to get these people to open up. I know there's a field here. I don't know how to do anything with it yet. Maybe I can manipulate it with my hands.
There was actually a part of that in the documentary. He made sure it was consensual, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
He wasn't just having patience and being like, hey, I'm going to massage you. But that's what it sounded like. Well, imagine back then.
Right.
That's going to start trouble for you.
Yes. Yeah.
That's probably where it started.
Right. Yeah. Well, and there was an entire sexuality institute in Germany. I think it was in Berlin. They discussed homosexuality, transgenderism. They had books. They had accounts, everything. And so when the Nazis came to power, that's one of the first things they destroyed, because I think Reich might have been onto something in that if you repress that energy, it's like every other energy that you hear about, whether it's chi or kana or whatever, it's the life force. And when you repress it and when you keep it from flowing properly, it does damage to the body and it does damage to the mind and the perception of the things around them. I don't know that Hitler and or whomever decided to destroy that thing, that institute, really grasped that part of it. The only thing they knew is that that was a tool for liberation, and they didn't want the masses being so liberated.
Man, it's a story as old as time.
It is. It is.
Yeah, it's why LSD is Schedule 1. We're talking about just a relaxation of your mind and not living in fear. I'm not a political guy. I'm not a go-go person. I'm pretty relaxed, as far as that goes, because I'm just like, yeah, it's fucked,
Right.
But Yeah, I mean, that's the greatest power is what you have already. You already have that power.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is learn how to release traumas and release your emotions. And, to be honest, and this is a little bit of a side tangent, but fascial maneuvers and like these things that are coming out now that are really interesting. And it's stuff that it's not new stuff, but it's like a new spin on the layers of fascia and like how the fluid in between kind of dries out because we're chronically dehydrated. And when you start stretching the fascia like in almost like a torquing fashion, imagine wringing out a washcloth or something.
Yeah.
When you start doing these maneuvers, you start like loosening up these layers and then get enough mineralization and everything. Then you start to rehydrate these. And what happens is emotions start to release. They just come to the surface because the body holds all emotional information from when you were born and theorized before, like generational
All
shit.
of your ancestral emotional baggage.
Right. It's crazy to think about that, but it all ties in.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is the whole twisting motion. There's the spiral of the universe again.
Yep.
That's the direction that your blood flows is in a spiral.
Yep.
That's the direction of everything.
Yeah.
Also, since we're on this side tangent, the whole dry needling thing. So Lori just had that done. I've never had it done. It's like acupuncture, except they do electrical impulses into the muscle. The muscle gets bound up. You have a knot, and they poke it and charge it. And what it does is it ushers in all this blood flow.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. It's all energy.
It's blood flow.
It's blood flow.
Blood is energy. Well, everything is. But blood is the, quote, physical equivalent of energy.
Yeah.
Like hydrogen, oxygen, it's everything. And a lot of these places where everybody's having problems is where stagnation happens. Blood can't get to there because it's closed off or something's happened. There could be some emotional baggage that has collected there, which sounds crazy.
Yeah.
But I mean, why does it sound any more crazy than like you can have a memory in your mind? Well, you can have a memory in your stomach or your groin or your armpit or wherever,
Well, I mean, we're both musicians. We're very familiar with muscle memory.
Yeah, totally.
I love getting to the point where my hands are doing what they're supposed to be doing and I have no conscious direction. It's just doing it.
We've had many discussions about this in general. I hate it and you love it.
I do.
It makes me feel like the world is ending and I'm going to like just disappear into dust.
Yeah.
But what's crazy is if I get in that state and it's just a heightened state of awareness where you get a glimpse that everything is going as it should without your help.
Yeah.
Without your help of your mind.
Right.
And that is the state that we are always talking about that is always present.
Right.
And I think the experience of that has been the most enlightening seconds of any of it. You live it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no teacher like lived experience.
You're like, what? And then you try to get back into it, and that's when you mess up.
Right. That's totally it. It's like so many things. You can't force anything, Yeah. You got to recognize it and let it be. So Wilhelm Reich, it's now Nazi Germany time, and he's got to get out of there. So he moves to New York City and continues his studies there and starts to attract students as well as patients, etc. And he was having some difficulty conducting his experiments because of the humidity in the summers in New York City. And he was thinking that the water vapor was interfering with things. And so he looked for a place that had a lot less humidity, especially during the summer months. And so he settled on a place in Maine. He named it orgone, which is great. Before I even say that, I'm getting out of order here. Whenever he really had his hand on the energy itself, he called it orgone. And of course, that is based off the word orgasm, but it really just has to do with the life force and that energy field that he had started detecting and was able to somewhat measure. But again, the water vapor kind of got in his way, and he was concerned that it wasn't a true or accurate reading. And so that's why he wanted to move to this place in Maine. I mean, within just a few years, he had this whole campus built and attracted lots of students, but then also they were treating people, but they didn't charge. And they made no promises of any kind of cure or anything.
Yeah.
They were like, we're going to treat you. We're also going to study the effects and see what happens. One thing that I thought was neat that he developed and was able to test, and there have been tests replicated with this box, this orgone accumulator. Essentially, you sit in it, and the energy that is around is concentrated. They've done tests where the ambient air outside the box is cooler than the air inside the box without a person in it. So it'd be one thing because, we all emit so many BTUs of thermal energy at any given time. So they did it empty and they found a difference in the temperature. They also did an experiment where they found a difference in the dissipation of electrical charge, and it was much slower inside the box than outside of the box. The only thing they can attribute these differences to is the construction of the box itself. It's got these multiple walls and these multiple layers, and it alternates between metal and organic material like cotton or whatever. And so there are these alternate walls that force the energy to stay within that box and to kind of concentrate. One of the interesting things that he observed with the orgone energy is that when it hits certain materials, it not only passes through, but it also reflects back. But when it hits other materials, it just reflects. So that's why he did the alternating. And so anytime energy was about to be reflected back, it was then pushed to the next layer. And so it caused everything to kind of build up within it. I saw a video, actually we both did, where they did this experiment with this box. They had one that followed the protocol and the design, and then they had another one that was basically just plywood, but it was the same size and everything else. They had people get in it and report on it. The people in the control box, the one that was just basically plywood, did not like it at all. They felt very uncomfortable. Yeah. They couldn't wait to get out of it. The ones that sat in the orgone accumulator were reporting just feelings of calm, feelings of lightness, feelings of energy. They didn't want to leave the box. They were happy to be in it. You see these things and you're like, okay. But then, when just average people are reporting on it and they're saying, I don't know why, but I just feel kind of good in here. I just feel kind of nice. Whereas the other people are like, get me out of this thing. It kind of shows me that he was definitely onto something with the energy. And we've talked about this before too, whether it is the ether or dark matter, whatever the nom de jour is, it exists. And apparently it's very difficult for us where we are now to actually identify and manipulate. And I think he was really onto it. I think he was really starting to figure out what it was, how it worked, etc.
Absolutely. I wrote down a couple things just because they were mind-blowing to me. How he came to see orgone, or how to understand that there was any kind of energy that was just everything. Everybody calls ether or whatever. He basically did a lot of experiments. For example, one was basically like he would just take some grass material, some dried grass material, and he would rehydrate that, and he put it on a slide under a microscope. They would study it every single day. And in about 10 days, what they noticed was that these pretty much replicas of amoeba started to just form out of this decaying grass material. So then they were like, well, that's in an unsterile, it could be anything. So they sterilized it above 180 degrees, which is what Louis Pasteur, his whole thing was like, nothing can live above that temperature. Well, They proved that wrong.
Yep.
And so they put in some material, they sterilized it, and then they dissolved it in water, and it still formed these amoeba life forms out of nothing.
Right.
He named them bions.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of this orgone idea, this energetic idea that things just kind of form and happen as a natural part of just everything.
Yeah.
Which I thought was pretty crazy. So at the end of all these bion tests, somebody he was working with heated up some sand from the sea. Did you hear about that?
No. I don't
So
know.
he heated it up, and they were going to do just a regular bion experiment, and they found something different that formed out of this heated sand, and he called them sand packet bions.
Okay.
And he put these on a slide with cancer cells, and it immediately destroyed every single one of them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the bions before were doing like various levels of destruction on cancer and tumors that they were like studying.
Mm-hmm.
And they also had other properties. They magnetized metal.
Oh, wow.
They caused eye irritations to people that were viewing them through the microscope.
Oh, wow.
And they also fogged up lenses of petri dishes, and they just thought it was really super weird. You know? After that is when he started studying the sand packet biomes, and he started injecting them into rats with tumors, and it was pretty across the board.
That's cool. I knew about the rats and the bions, but I didn't realize that was derived from sand.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to me because we've been taught that life on Earth is carbon-based.
Yeah.
And that's wrong. Because, yes, it is carbon-based, but as Tesla noted, quartz crystals seem to be alive. They have some kind of energy, etc. And if you look on the periodic table of the elements, right below carbon is silicon. And silicon is what is in sand, and it is what's in quartz crystal. And on the ocean floor, there are silicon-based life forms. Tesla had no way of knowing it at the time that he said it. He just knew it because he pulled it from the ether. But I find that really interesting because I wonder if something to do with the silicon-based life forms that may be in the sand were the things that he was seeing, or are a component of the bions or something. I don't know.
Yeah, well, another little side note, all beings are silica-based. So we are a silica-based crystal. We're the same thing that you're talking about.
Right, but we're taught that we're carbon-based.
Right, I know, and it's wild.
Yeah.
I saw something about that carbon-based. It was another guy, and this is not a fully formed rant like any of my rants are, but there was a scientist, and I'm gonna send you this video because it's crazy. I don't know if he's a scientist or just a researcher or whatever, but he was actually talking about the carbon-based life forms and the crystal-based life forms, and he was talking about orgone. Basically, in his experiments, whenever there's a forest fire, anything that burns or chars and turns back to carbon, the energy of that, since energy can't be destroyed or created, it has to go somewhere.
Right.
It's what do you call it? An anion. So the energy that releases is an anion release. He said it's basically kind of like a cloud that comes up, but invisible. And it searches out a genetic match to what it was. So if it was a stick or a rabbit or any kind of animal or a plant, it looks for that first to heal that, to create a balance of life, because that's all life wants to do.
Right, just balance, yeah.
Which I thought was super crazy.
Yeah.
I was just like, what? And if it can't find a match, and I don't know this guy, but it was just like crazy information out of nowhere, and he was very... I don't know, like an old dude, just he was just going off, man. But he was explaining it, and it was kind of hard to follow because it was very technical. But he said it will find the closest cationic deficiency, I guess. So it'll go into another thing that's destroyed or another thing that's hurt or whatever, and it will bring that energy in to facilitate the healing of whatever that is.
Interesting. I wonder if that affects it. Let's say it had been a pine tree and it finds some kind of flower. It can't find another pine tree or anything, so it finds some kind of flower. Does any of the original pine tree-ness affect the flower upon its kind of regeneration or its healing? Like, I wonder.
I really have no idea. That's the first time I ever heard anything like that. So I need to kind of do a little dive into that.
Yeah.
That was interesting, though. But it was based on Reich's stuff, too. Now is such a crazy time because there's so much information. But in all of that information, if you get lucky or if you look enough, you can find some really crazy stuff that people are looking into and discovering. And
right. Well, and we've talked about this before, too. I see so much overlap.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like, not everyone, but there are a lot of people that are working towards the same end, coming at it from different directions with different theories, but still, there's so much overlap of this.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting.
But yeah, so the bions, the sand packet bions, and then cancer he found to be amoebic, basically the same process as when he had the grass.
Oh, wow.
Under there. So he theorized that all disease was where the blood cuts off and the circulation cuts off because of emotional problems, emotional stuckness, or whatever, like concentration or traumatic experience. And the blood can't flow and bring oxygen to heal and circulate through the area. And then it stagnates. And then out of nothing, the amoebic formations form and they start basically making tumors and disease.
Yeah, because they're bunched up there. And
they don't have anywhere to go. There's no release of them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. And the release is so important. And that was the thing that he was focused on. And, you know, even now, so many decades later, we're still pretty puritanical in our sexual practices and our beliefs around sexuality and around monogamy and all of that. It's hard to imagine an entire society that could be so liberated and balanced and free, especially when you're like, well, part of it is the release that, you know, comes with orgasm and that orgiastic energy. When most people hear that, they're like, okay, fruitcake. Like, there's...
Well, right. But I mean, like, it's a taboo thing to even say orgasm. Like, it's...
Right.
It's just something that, to this point, or at least in our culture, I mean, I'm sure there are some cultures that are much more free with the explanations of sex and orgasm and all that. But for our culture, like, it's... I mean, who walks around talking about orgasms all the time? I mean, unless you're just way into that, you know?
Right,
like, well, I mean, who's not into it? But, you know, but at the same time, nobody knows why they're into it. And it's the same reason probably that people take drugs or do adrenaline type, you know, like jumping off of a mountain or whatever it is. You're trying to reach the same intensity as the orgasm.
Right.
And you still don't.
Right.
People that take heroin describe heroin as an orgasm. Yeah. Basically. But then after they do it enough times, they can't reach that state anymore.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah, it's really the most driving force of life.
Yeah. Well, and it creates life.
It's the singularity almost,
yes,
of concentration, you know?
Yeah.
And release. Actually came up with a formula called orgasm formula.
Well, that's a very to the point title.
Mechanical tension leads to bioelectrical charge, leads to bioelectrical discharge, leads to mechanical relaxation. That's like duh, but like that is the formula.
Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, it's a buildup,
right?
And it's boom,
right?
You know, and then a relaxation. That's where he started. You know, I don't really know what to say after that, but I'll just add this in there somehow.
Yeah, well, you know, it's the dissipation of the accumulated energy, you know, so because again, seeking balance. So you can't be all charged. You have to discharge in order to achieve that balance. So that, that makes sense.
Yeah, what I was going to say is also in Taoist practice, and there are exercises where you actually come to the state of climax or orgasm, and you don't release that, and you actually bring that energy up into your head. Oh. Like from the sacral all the way up into the pineal and the crown of your head. And that is how the healing of Taoism, that's how it works.
Okay.
And Yeah.
I was not aware of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy. And, it's even crazier to imagine being able to like hold that back and have the discipline and the practice to be able to do that. And it's not every time.
Well, right.
It's just for a regeneration or meditation sort of thing,
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that would probably take a lot of practice and discipline, I would imagine. Well, what's it's like the
practice.
sting and the tantric sex or whatever. Yeah, it's probably not too far off from that in some ways.
No, probably not at all. It's, I can't even imagine that stuff. You can't really imagine anything else in your existence that has that much intensity to it, really.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, it's one of our primal drives.
Yeah.
And there's a reason for that. So he's got this institute, he's got these students and patients, etc. They grow a lot of blueberries in Maine, and they were having this terrible drought. All the prognosticators, all the weather forecasters at the time were like, we don't see rain anywhere in our near future, and it's too bad because the blueberry crop's going to be decimated and, it's going to be terrible. So some blueberry farmers near Reich knew that he was an inventor and had been working on energy and dissipation and everything else. And he had been working on this cloudbuster, and they were like, hey, would you just try it and see if you can bring us some rain? We really need some rain. And so he did, and not only did it work, but they ended up having several days of rain in a row, and it was enough that it saved all of these farmers' blueberry crops.
Yeah.
And they were like, this guy's a genius.
Yeah.
He's figured out how to control weather.
Yeah.
The original cloudbuster is still there. It's not hooked up or anything.
Yeah.
But it's neat because it takes water vapor from the atmosphere and essentially coaxes it down to earth, it pulls it. He uses these tubes. They're connected to groundwater, and it basically ushers it in.
Yeah.
I don't know about the one he created there if it had a crystal in it, but I saw someone that was making one, and they put a crystal in the middle.
I just want to back up and say, when you were talking about him moving to Maine because of the weather conditions and the humidity, that's where he started studying the effects of humidity and orgone.
Oh, okay.
And so that's kind of where the weather modification actually started to take place too.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I guess, I don't know. I think orgone has a favorable draw towards water.
Yeah.
And which makes sense because we're human and we're water.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And the orgone accumulator, yeah. So basically, we're going to have to start putting diagrams on some kind of extra PDF or some shit. It would be neat.
Yeah.
But yeah, everybody should look at orgone accumulators. It's wood, and then, like you said, an insulating material, cotton, or actually, in another case, resin.
Yep.
And metal. So the organic will draw in the orgone from the atmosphere, and then it hits the metal, and the metal reflects it, then it hits it back to the organic material, and then it pushes it past the metal into the next layer where it keeps accumulating until the center of this box.
Yeah.
How would you ever even figure that out?
Right, yeah.
Ever.
Yeah. To me, there is a component of the spiral thing, because when you see a spiral, it's large on the outside and it's small in the middle or whatever. It's kind of similar to that in that it keeps pushing everything closer and closer to the middle.
Yeah.
So all the energy is forced to the middle.
Yeah, totally.
It's neat.
So jumping to the Cloudbuster, which is just out of nowhere. It's like, what?
Right.
It's just 10 metal pipes that are pretty long, maybe
Yeah.
10 feet, 15 feet. And it's this contraption that has all these wheels so that you can turn it and move it up and down. And then the ends of the pipes are connected to metal hollow cables that feed into a body of water, like groundwater.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't really think about it pulling. That is what it does. It just pulls, because there were diagrams to show how they break apart a cloud, which is by pointing it at the center of the cloud structures.
Right.
And then how they bring clouds, which is putting it over the horizon. There was like another one too, and I can't remember what it was. But there's like 3 just initial ways that they did that. And with the blueberry farmers, they're like, oh, well, how long is this going to last? And he's like, the drought is broken.
Yeah.
Now, so the rest of the year, you're going to have regular rains.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is crazy.
It's insane. Yeah. There was a writer, and I can't remember which publication it was. It wasn't like the New York Times or anything, but it was, I think, a publication that's still in print today. But anyway, she wasn't having any of this. And so she wrote this article basically calling him a quack, and she painted him as a deviant. And she called in that article, she was like, someone needs to put a stop to this. And that's where the trouble began.
Yeah, his first ex-wife did that too.
Yeah.
She was a psychoanalyst. Yeah. And I guess she really hated him. So like she started writing about him being full of shit and everything. And if people attack somebody so much to a point of insanity.
Yeah, fixating on it, yeah.
Not just people, but like governments. And they're onto something.
It seems that way. Somehow, 2 months after this lady's article was published, the head of the FDA, what comes to his attention, he filed an injunction to stop all of the work at the Institute or orgone. And in Reich's defense, Reich himself sent this letter. There's no way it was going to work, but I very much appreciate his argument. And his argument was science can't be litigated in court. So there's no point in me participating in this trial. What should happen instead, and of course I'm paraphrasing, but what should happen instead is it should be judged by other scientists, and there should be discourse, and we as scientists should be allowed to make errors, and we should be allowed to experiment, and we should be allowed to have this discourse with other scientists so that science itself may judge, not a jury or a judge or anything else. I fully agree with that.
Yeah, and the judge told the jury, he's just like, well, the trial is about if he broke the law.
Right, and they just entered a default judgment because they're like, well, he's not coming, so...
Right.
And that was that. And then so what was really nuts to me, and this feeds back into exactly what you're saying, rather than just say, okay, no more work, mister, they were like, no more work, and we're going to destroy everything you ever did.
Yeah.
And they burned everything. There were books that they were just supposed to take and prevent the public from seeing, but not destroying. Well, they destroyed those too.
Yeah.
I would like to believe that was an accident, a miscommunication, because I understand how large organizations function. And so miscommunication is more than common. It's kind of the default. There's so much miscommunication, so much misunderstanding, everything. However, not only the liberating aspect of the orgone energy and the taboo that it sought to kind of break, but then also the understandings of the human condition and how we can be mass hypnotized, basically, and then weather control. Yeah, they were scared to death of this man.
Yeah, totally, man.
He was giving the people too much,
Yeah. Man, he was just on the cutting edge of it. And there has to be something special about a person or a consciousness or a genius. It's like Tesla or, Casey or any of these people that just have these abilities to just have these ideas. They just have these ideas like, oh, well, I wonder why this does that. And, oh, wait, that's doing that. Well, what if I did this? But it's not normal. It's not like what I would think of, or just somebody would just be like, oh, well, this is behaving like that. So what if I try to capture the weather? Or,
Yeah.
you know, whatever. You're
Yeah,
just like,
totally,
what?
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, it's like, where do these ideas come from? Well,
Right.
they come from the ether.
yeah, it's just ether.
Yeah, because it's all out there, and it's just like sometimes you get to tune into it, and sometimes you get those epiphanies or those revelations. It's interesting, we as a species, I guess, for some reason do seem to want a leader, and we do sometimes seem to believe that there is a puppet master pulling the strings, and that's, why we believe in gods, etc. And we use the term revelation like God was hiding it and now he revealed it to just me or just this group of people or whatever. And I'm like, is it that, or is it just there? And sometimes we tune into the universal truths, and sometimes we get a brief moment of epiphany or enlightenment because we have allowed those truths to enter, and it happens to be a moment that we can understand them. Things just line up properly and your energies are correct. And so you're like, oh, I wonder if we did this, if this would happen.
Well, yeah, it's like anybody with a natural talent. Doesn't mean you don't hone it and you don't practice and you don't get schooling and all that stuff, like to better understand and better explain what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But like, you can pick up an instrument, or maybe you can do whatever it is, and you just feel that it's right.
Yeah.
When I was 9 years old or something, and I was introduced to a guitar, I knew that I loved it.
Yeah.
And I picked it up very fast, like super fast. My uncle taught me, my dad taught me a little bit, my uncle taught me a lot because he was way more into like heavy metal and stuff.
Yeah.
It was just crazy. And you just have like this taste in your mouth or something. That's part of your thing.
Yeah.
Even if you don't know it,
Yeah, no, I remember the very first time I held a guitar. I have no musicians in my family. In fact, most of them can't keep a steady rhythm or sing anywhere close to in key. I'm not a great singer either. But I remember the very first time I held, it was a Christmas morning. I got a guitar for Christmas. I remember the first time holding it and just like strumming the strings, not knowing anything about the guitar. And it just felt comfortable. It just felt like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. And we had a piano in the house. My sister took piano lessons. I, plunked around on it and like had fun playing Jaws or whatever else. And I thought it was neat. It wasn't me, and it was more furniture than musical instruments. And
exact same with me.
But that guitar, now I felt something.
Yeah, my grandma had a piano and she had an organ, and it was just like a toy.
Yeah.
In my mind. But then the guitar was like, oh no, I can learn this. I can do this.
Yeah.
Like, when I learned a chord, I was just like, oh man, this is like,
Yeah.
what is this? What is that?
Yeah. Well, and it's also somewhat less intimidating because in our house, the piano was in a certain room.
Oh, yeah.
And so, you're kind of out in front of everybody, where the guitar, you can be in your own room with the door closed.
Yeah.
The other thing is there was only 6 strings, whereas, piano has 88 keys, and it's just so massive. And this was a lot more understandable to me.
Yeah.
So it is very much like that. The information that's out there and the energy that's out there does kind of make it into a person. And it's beautiful when everything can align in that way. And you're like, oh, okay, this is, the path that I'm supposed to be on, or this is the thing I'm supposed to be doing right now, or whatever. I go out of my way to try to find that in day-to-day life. It's almost like a pulse check or a temperature check. Like, am I in the right frame of mind? Am I on the right path? Yes or no, and I need to fix that or whatever.
I get in weird headspaces where, like yesterday even, I'm just sitting out on the front porch and I'm like looking at the sky. I was thinking about that cloud buster. And I was just like, what would be the difference between pipes and water and just looking at a cloud? Part of the weird Ryan thinks that it's the exact same thing.
Well, right.
Concentration and energy.
Well, and then there's the whole like physicist thing of my observing it is affecting it.
That's what I'm saying.
I mean, I get that too. That's on a physicist level, and that makes sense to me. Like you're going to affect the outcome.
Yeah.
Simply by observing it.
It makes more sense to me than pointing some tubes at. I mean, I could see that being a mechanical way of doing it as well. It kind of reminds me of radionics or something, like where the radionics machine and the numbers that you tap into using, well, it's a stick plate, like where you rub it and then, I don't want to get too far ahead, but you rub this plate and then it sticks at a point. Your hand just sticks. And I've done it before and it really does. It's fucking weird because it's slick. And at a point it starts to get harder to rub and then it just, and people will be like, yeah, well, your hand's getting, but no, it's not getting sweaty or whatever, like warm. I'm just talking about a light rubbing and it does. It's just, and then you just stop turning the knob. And that's how you set the rates on these radionics machines.
Okay.
Right? But you can do it with a pendulum. You hold the pendulum turns in the left hand or whatever. Say you're turning this knob and you're slowly, very, very, very slowly. It increases and increases and increases the spin. The way that I was practicing it was I was out about, 6 inches from a surface. And once it got the spin crazy enough to where it was knocking against that surface, that's when I would stop. If you guys want to look into radionics, which is an amazing, crazy subject, and it's so dense. It's mostly in Europe. Okay. We don't have a lot of stuff here. They took it and ran back when it started, Yeah. So that's where you should look, like Malcolm Ray and all these people that really do some crazy stuff. But it all ties in, like you're saying. It's all in us. It's not out there. It's not being brought. It's all in here. And the vibrational tuning, what we call concentration, is the vibrational matching of these different states that you want to achieve. It's not necessarily that you're concentrating on it. It's that you're vibrating at the same frequency as this thing.
Yeah.
That you think you're attracting.
You're creating a harmony.
Yeah. You're
or
just
a resonance.
Yeah. It's like your consciousness is just, you bring it up and you bring it down.
Yeah.
And then whatever matches it is the mirror of life.
Yeah. It's interesting that the pendulum swings in a circle because, again, that's a spiral again.